Hello, you're listening to part 5 of a series from the Poly Tipster. In part 5, I talk about how to come out to your kids. So, I am a female in a triad relationship with two men, and we have two kids. I consider them my stepchildren. So, the first thing, this applies to all relationship types. Polyamory is not unique in this. You want to take it slow before introducing a significant other to the children. So even if you're just dating one person, kids get attached and they get their hearts broken just like we do. So I would recommend that you be pretty darn sure that the relationship is worthy of introducing that person to your children. Um, I've seen people say kids get to see babysitters, kids get to see coworkers, kids get to see friends, but I think there's something a little more special about a significant other. They're going to spend more time around your children than those other types of people. So you want to take it pretty slow. In our case, we were a good, I want to say we were a good maybe 9 months into the relationship, maybe longer, before we made the oldest child aware that we were actually in a romantic relationship. We were careful not to hold hands around the children, not to kiss, not to do anything that might make them think we're in any sort of a relationship because they're going to just go home and tell that to their parents. They were around us quite a bit. They were around my husband, they were around me, the children, but the children were not aware that their father was romantically involved with me until we were ready to share that information with well the oldest in this case. So let's see here. I want to talk about the ages a little bit, just to kind of when you do have a discussion, it's going to need to be directed in a way that's age appropriate. So in our case, we were dealing with one very, very young child. She was around 3, and the older child was around 8, but she was a pretty mature 8. And the youngest, I mean, the youngest, she just always was around us. We've always been part of her life as long as she could remember. So that one's a little bit easier when you're talking about, well, how do I tell her? How do I talk to her? But in her case, fast forward 5 years later, or 4.5 years later, and I did at some point sit down with her, and she's been having, or she was having, some distressful moments dealing with her mother and some of the alienation issues that she has to deal with. And her mother, her mom still has feelings towards her father. So it's very confusing for her. She'd go home and she'd listen to her mother talk about how she still loved her father. And she would come back to our household and she would have some confusion. And, for the most part, the way we dealt with her when she was 3 up until she was about 8, we basically just didn't say anything. I mean, what kids are flexible, they're malleable in their thinking. What they know is their reality. So we didn't make a big deal out of anything, really. When we'd go out in public, we'd make sure that she had a way of addressing people's questions because, people would say, "Oh, is that your mommy?" When they would refer to me. And from a very, very early age, we taught her how to answer that question. And she asked if we could call us, if she could call myself and my husband a nickname, and we were okay with that. So sometimes when somebody would ask her that question, she would just say, "Oh no, this is whatever the nickname," and the the person asking the question would just nod. I mean, it allayed their assumptions that I was not her mommy, which is what they were curious about. Um, Later, when she became 8, as she got older and she started running into some of her confusion with her mom, I did sit her down, and I did it with dolls and toys. And what I did was I first went through the different relationship types that she might be familiar with just in the mainstream. We talked about mommy and daddy and how some people live there in their households and they have a mommy and a daddy. And great, she got that. Um, and then we graduated to, okay, you know how in some relationships sometimes you have two daddies. We talked about, homosexuality and lesbianism in that way. And again, we did it with her dolls. And the same for lesbianism. And then from that point, we jumped off to, well, there's another relationship type. And again, with the dolls, we showed her how you could sometimes have households that have, two mommies and one daddy, or two mommies and two daddies, and that all of these relationship types are okay. So that's kind of how I did it with the youngest one. I did it as sort of play therapy, using her dolls, and by the end of that discussion, I feel like it was a pretty safe way to explore that topic with her. Um, at the end of the discussion, she just kind of looked at me and she said, "So does that mean my daddy's never going to get a different or new wife?" And I was like, "That's right." Oh well, I mean, at least that's not in the plans at the moment. But, you know, as far as she's concerned, her mom had been telling her her dad had the potential to marry somebody and she would have a new mommy someday. And, you know, it's pretty confusing. It's like, well, she wanted, her mom's lived in denial that her dad actually is in a fully fleshed out, full blown relationship and is trying to shape reality to the children such that the dad is one day going to move on and get married and get a girlfriend and be in some sort of traditional setup. I mean, that may happen, but that's not in the plans, and I don't feel confusing the children in that way is really productive. So, as far as answering her question, her dad is in a relationship. He has somebody he loves. There aren't any plans at the moment for him to move on to get another mommy for her. So that's how we answered it for the youngest one. For the oldest one, she was around 8 at the time when we first started dating. When I first started dating her father, and she was very mature, is very mature. So I wasn't involved in the discussion that her father had with her, but her dad sat down with her and wanted to understand what her thoughts were on me and my husband, how she felt about us, what would she think about it if we all moved in together. And we'd spent a great deal of time up until that point doing um, outings and activities, going to theme parks, going for bike rides. We'd put quite a bit of into those relationships with the children. So she was very familiar with us and thought we were these wonderful, fun people at that point in her life. So of course, you know, she didn't have any problem when her dad sat her down to discuss it with her. And we ended up having some follow-up discussions as the years rolled by. She's got friends here, and we try to make things easy for her. I've talked about this in one of my other videos. Her friends, I had already taken the parents aside for her friends that are in our community and explained to them what our lifestyle is. So if the parents of her friends wanted to sit their children down to talk about it, then they could do so. So I know in at least one case, the mom chose to just let things evolve naturally. And if her children were curious about how our family setup was, she was willing to answer those questions, but she didn't go out of her way to actually explain anything to those children. So in that case, eventually one of her daughters did ask me a question about our family setup. And her mom happened to be present when that happened. And I just said, oh, that's, my husband is my husband, and my stepdaughter's daddy is my partner, is my boyfriend. And that was my explanation to that child. And the mom the mom sat her down at that point and talked to her about it. They had to talk about it. And after that, that was it. There was no more questions, and there were no more questions to my stepdaughter. Um, I did observe. There's a couple of things that I've observed from my stepdaughter, my oldest stepdaughter. She she does have friends who don't know, and she's got her friends from school in the because her community where she lives full time is not the same city as the community that me and my partners live in. And I've seen her explain that to her friends from school that I am her stepmom. She's actually called me her stepmom to those folks. Um, she's had questions from friends, newer friends that we don't know very well that live here, who've asked her questions about who I am or who my husband is, and she's kind of just shrugged and not answered the question. And I've also heard her answer the question in a way that she just refers to me by the pet name she calls me to her friend. Oh, that is so and so. She'll just refer to me as my pet name. So she just kind of leaves it up to I guess, up to the observer as to who I am. Maybe they think I am the babysitter I've heard her refer to me as her father's roommate. So, she's kind of got an array of answers, kind of like we do, depending upon her circumstances and how well she knows the friends involved and what kind of impression she's trying to make on those those friends. So I have heard it said that out of all of the things you as a family are going to have to go through, your children having to navigate this socially might be the part of your life that you're going to have the most challenges, because kids are trying to figure out who they are, and they're trying to place themselves in the greater world in a way that makes sense to them. So you, when you sit down and explain things to your kids, you know what the questions are going to be that they're going to get. You know what questions you got, and you want to help your kids right out the gate by giving them a way of explaining your family life to others, so they have ready answers to give their friends and their friends' parents. And like I did, make it easy on your kids by just taking the parents aside and telling them in advance. That way you don't get that awkward, your friend is having a sleepover at her girlfriend's house and you've got a nosy probing mother or father who wants to grill your daughter about what her family life is all about. I mean, there are parents out there who will do that. So, just make it as easy as possible for your kids. And as far as coming out to them, it's not nearly as difficult to come out to your kids, at least not emotionally. You know your kids, they know you, they love you love them. It's pretty easy to sit them down and ask them how they feel about something and tell them what your choices are. Especially when they're young. I've never had to come out to older, like teenager, college age kids, but if I had to guess, I would imagine that it is probably a lot like coming out to friends, coworkers, adults, that you would approach it in the same way. You're 60 years old and you're sitting down with your 25-year-old to tell them about your polyamorous life and your new partner, and you want them to be accepting and understand you. They're at that point they're cooked. They're adults. They've already figured out what their worldview is, and so you would treat it a lot like you would treat coming out to anybody else, I think. I mean, I'm just, again, no personal experience with it, but that's my take on that. So for younger children, if you do decide to tell an ex-wife or an ex-husband, I really think you have to tell your kids. I, I think that I think that the ex-wife and the ex-husband, depending on their reaction, I mean, if they're really toxic about it and hostile about it, your kids are never going to hear the end of it, and they're going to hear it from the ex for the first time, and they're going to hear it in a way that's, you know, you're not going to be able to control the narrative to them. Your ex is. So, my advice is tell your children when you tell your ex, and vice versa. If you tell your kids, tell your ex. If you tell your ex, tell your kids. And you then can control the narrative a lot better than your ex sitting there toxically declaring what a hedonist you are and how horrible you are for doing this. Kids are smart. They pick up on what's what. and they understand when, when one of you is angry and just venting versus actually giving them some useful information. So, um, so yeah, so the last thing, do you keep your lifestyle hidden from your kids? So I would kind of going back to taking it slow. You probably should keep your lifestyle hidden from your kids until you're ready to either move in together or your partner is around them so much that you're concerned that they're going to they're going to get so attached to that person, and I don't think there's a reason to tell your kids until you know that you're in a committed serious relationship. If you're just stepping out and dating, I don't think there's a reason to tell your kids at all. I mean, other than you want to teach them values of honesty and who you are as a person, but you don't tell you when you go to the bathroom, when you go and have sex in your bedroom, you don't give all the gory details to anybody, to your children, to anybody. That's your own private business. And I think, that's kind of how I see that. So if you're going out on a date, you don't live with somebody, you're just starting out in this lifestyle and you're dating. And I don't know why you would tell your kids. I think that dating is one of those things where you are trying different things and lives and people on for size, and telling your kids about all the different things you're trying on for size, until you've cooked it, until it's all done and you're ready. I'm not really sure why you would tell your kids about that. Now, if this is like whatever. This is who you've always been. You've always been someone who's been polyamorous. You have kids, you bring kids into that, and it's just this is who you are and this is who you're always going to be, and you really want your kids to know who you are. I mean, it's like any other value or religion or whatever. It's hey kids, I'm Baptist. This is who mommy is. She's always going to be Baptist. Hey kids, mommy is not someone who's going to ever be with one person. She's always going to be the kind of person who probably has two or three boyfriends. That's fine. I guess that's fine. That's living your truth and being honest and sharing your values with your kid. I don't know. If it were me, I guess, and I were just simply in that dating phase, I definitely would not tell my children. I would go ahead and just keep that hidden for a while. And then in our case, we all live together. We are a family, and it's pretty important that the kids know, because they are going to be asked questions about their household setup, and they're going to be grilled by their mother. So there were actual reasons to tell the children and make sure they were in on the loop. Um, just living in a house by yourself and going out and dating, or maybe you're living with a partner and you're going out and dating other partners. I just don't, if you have comments about that, I'd love to hear them. Why tell your kids that when you're in a dating phase of all of this? That would be great to hear some of the comments. So thanks for listening. I have part 6 that wraps all of this up. So check that video out.